You didn't decide to change, reality did. It moved beneath you quietly, without asking, without ceremony. Imagine this: a woman stirs before dawn, awakened by something invisible pulling her from sleep. The air feels familiar, same bed, same blinds, same filtered light, yet nothing fits quite right. She moves through the morning rituals, brushing teeth, pouring coffee, checking her calendar. But every gesture feels slightly displaced, as though the body remembers choreography the mind forgot. Then the subtle realization: the thoughts arriving aren't the same ones that fell asleep last night. Something has shifted, not with noise, but with precision, a silent rearrangement of her world's code. Days pass, and reality responds differently. Coincidences cluster, conversations bend toward new outcomes. Life adjusts its orbit around her new frequency. That's how a quantum jump begins, not with fireworks, but with quiet rewrites. You don't feel the leap itself. You sense only the fading echo of the version you were. The evidence comes later, disguised as synchronicity. The truth: you've already done this many times, small, unseen leaps between versions of self. Most call it coincidence. The field calls it coherence. People assume change is linear, that progress takes time, that healing earns its way through struggle. But what if time isn't the path at all? What if it's the illusion that hides instantaneous transformation? A quantum jump isn't you moving toward a better life. It's reality collapsing into alignment with the vibration you've become. The ego resists that idea. It wants proof, timelines, order. Yet the field doesn't argue in logic. It speaks in frequency. When your inner signal no longer matches your outer world, matter reorganizes. No permission required. The shocking part isn't that this can happen, it's that it already has. You've been reconstructing your past every time you remember it, reshaping identity like clay with each recollection. The self you think you are is already quantum fluid, impermanent, rewritten in every breath. You can feel it. Can't you? The faint static left behind when reality reconfigures, that subtle dissonance, that sense of being slightly out of phase with your own life. It lingers like the afterimage of a flash you can't quite locate. The old version of you, the one that belonged to yesterday's timeline, hasn't vanished entirely. It drifts at the edges, whispering familiar lines, asking to be remembered. This residue is not failure, it is the echo of completion. Each time your frequency rises, the universe leaves behind traces of the pattern you just outgrew, emotional dust on the furniture of your mind. You wake and wonder why the same job feels heavy, why the same faces seem distant, why the same routines suddenly ache with foreignness. That's not confusion, that's contrast. You've shifted bands, but your story hasn't caught up. The ego hates this gap. It rushes to patch the fracture, to return to known ground. It says, I must fix this feeling. But the feeling isn't broken, it's evidence. It's the soft alarm that says, you are no longer this. And the longer you resist it, the louder the static grows. Think of residue as the skin a snake leaves behind, perfect in form, utterly lifeless. To cling to it is to suffocate. To shed it is to breathe. You don't erase the old self. You simply stop animating it. Every belief you feed attention to becomes current again. Every story you repeat to feel safe revives a timeline you've already surpassed. So pause when you sense that drag, that subtle nostalgia for what used to define you. It is not longing, it is gravity, and gravity is only strong until flight begins. But how do you release without collapsing? By remembering that residue dissolves in awareness, not analysis. You don't have to dissect the old vibration, you simply need to outshine it. When coherence rises, fragments fade. This is how timelines clean themselves, not by will, but by resonance. Yet there's a deeper layer, The residue reveals the mind's favorite illusion that growth must hurt, that endings mean loss. In truth, endings are sensory proof that the jump occurred. The ache you feel when something no longer fits is not pain, it's signal realignment. It's your system expanding beyond its last calibration. Watch what happens when you stop fighting it. The ache becomes spacious. The heaviness turns transparent. Suddenly, what looked like disorientation becomes clarity, not the kind born of logic, but of liberation. You're realizing that identity is not fixed matter. It's energy wearing memory. And memory, like light, bends easily when the frequency shifts. Every story you tell about yourself is an anchor or a launch pad. Say, "I'm always anxious," and the field stabilizes around that frequency. Say, "I'm learning peace," and reality opens new parameters. The residue tests which one you'll choose to believe. And here's the strange mercy: the universe never deletes your past. It stores it like data in unused files, accessible but dormant. You can revisit it, but you don't have to run it. Free will doesn't mean rewriting code manually. It means choosing which program to execute now. From this view, healing isn't about becoming pure, it's about becoming precise. Each emotional release is an update to your operating frequency. Each forgiveness of self or other is a deletion of corrupted files. And when enough fragments clear, your system boots into a higher coherence, seamlessly. Notice the pattern emerging. You aren't losing yourself, you're refining signal quality. What once felt like death is simply defragmentation. You're remembering that the old self isn't a prison, it's compost for growth. It decomposes into energy that fuels the next version of you. The residue will try to seduce you with nostalgia, whispering that it was safer, simpler, slower. Smile at it, thank it, then step forward, because each time you do, the static clears a little more and the signal becomes unmistakable. And that signal, pure, coherent, steady, will soon show you something far more radical, that the very time you think you're escaping was never real to begin with. You can sense it now, can't you? The residue fading, the static quieting, and beneath it, a deeper hum, the pulse of something timeless moving through you. What if what you call past and future are not destinations at all, but vibrations overlapping like musical notes in the same chord we've been taught to move forward, step by step, as if life were a staircase climb, one rung, earn the next. But the field doesn't work in stairs, it works in symphonies. Time is not a line, it's a resonance band. You don't travel through it, you tune through it. Consider this: every moment you've ever lived still exists, suspended in a lattice of frequency. You call them memories, but in quantum terms, they are coordinates, different data sets of self. When your vibration changes, you don't just heal the past, you shift into a version of reality where the past has already healed. That's why change feels instant once it finally happens. Not because you leapt through time, but because you stopped vibrating in the frequency of waiting. Waiting is a frequency loop. It traps you in potential instead of presence. The moment you stop needing the future to arrive, you collapse into the now, and that collapse is the jump. Think about it. Every breakthrough you've ever had came not through more effort, but through surrender. You didn't climb to it, you fell into coherence. The second you released the belief that time owed you progress, you slipped through the illusion and landed in the version of yourself who had already arrived. This is why those who obsess over timelines rarely move. They're measuring motion in seconds, not states. They're chasing a linear progression that doesn't exist. But the field doesn't reward time, it responds to tone. The universe listens not to your clock, but to your coherence. When your vibration becomes incompatible with your current life, time doesn't argue, it bends. Opportunities rearrange, people shift roles, probabilities fold like paper cranes. To the rational mind, it looks miraculous. To the field, it's mathematics. Even physics hints at this. What some scientists call the many worlds, interpretation suggests that every possible version of reality exists simultaneously. Every choice you could make already has been made somewhere. You're not creating outcomes, you're syncing to them. Each decision, emotion, and belief functions as a tuning fork. Strike one tone, and the corresponding world hums into view. So what if you stopped thinking of yourself as moving forward in time and instead saw time moving through you? What if you realized that next year isn't ahead, but adjacent, one vibrational octave away? The self who already healed, already succeeded, already loves with ease. That self is not later, it's parallel. Your task isn't to chase that version, it's to stabilize your signal so clearly that the two frequencies merge. That's when time folds. That's when miracles look ordinary. You might ask, but if everything already exists, what's the point of striving the answer experience? Consciousness evolves not by creating new matter, but by exploring new arrangements of it. You are not here to force reality. You are here to feel its variations. Each alignment teaches the field about itself. Each jump expands awareness. And so, when you catch yourself saying, "I'm not there yet," pause. There is no there. There is only a spectrum of resonance, infinite, available, and waiting for your coherence to select one channel. The moment you stop counting time, the signal stabilizes. Now imagine this: if time is an illusion, then every possibility, every healed self, every loving life, every quantum version of you already coexists right here. The only distance is vibrational, and the bridge, emotion. Emotion is frequency embodied. It's the translator between unseen potential and lived experience. So when you feel joy without evidence, gratitude without reason, love without object, you are not being naive. You are collapsing timelines. You are proving to the field that you remember how it works. And once you grasp this, once you sense that time has been an elaborate mirror, the question shifts completely. You no longer ask, "When will it happen?" You ask, "What frequency am I choosing to inhabit now?" Because that choice, subtle, emotional, invisible, determines not the clock you live by, but the reality that lives through you. You can feel how the illusion of time dissolves into something even stranger, awareness itself, becoming the architect of matter. If frequency is the language, then observation is the syntax that shapes the sentence of reality. It's not poetry, it's physics disguised as revelation. Think of the double-slit experiment electrons fired toward two narrow openings. When no one observes, they behave like waves, existing in many possibilities at once. But when a measuring device is placed to track them, they collapse into particles choosing a single path. The act of watching changes what is watched. The field doesn't reveal, it responds. You, too, are that observer. Every expectation you hold, every thought infused with emotion, becomes a measuring device that decides how energy crystallizes around you. The world isn't happening to you, it's happening through you. Conscious attention collapses potential into form. This is why focus matters more than effort. Most people try to do reality into being, but the quantum field doesn't bow to force. It follows coherence. When thought, emotion, and identity align, they create a consistent frequency that the field can interpret. It's the difference between static and signal. You've felt it before, that sudden alignment when everything clicks. The parking space opens, the call arrives. The opportunity appears as if summoned. That's not luck. That's resonance finding its match. Now, some may call this metaphysical speculation, but even cautious scientists admit the observer effect challenges everything we thought we knew about separation. If particles, the smallest building blocks, refuse to behave without observation, how could consciousness be an afterthought? Perhaps it's the source code itself. Here's where the paradox deepens. The universe appears physical, solid, definite, yet beneath the surface, it's a shimmering cloud of probabilities waiting for your attention to decide its shape. Every moment is a negotiation between infinite potential and the one frequency you choose to inhabit. Imagine each thought as a beam of light through a lens, where focus intensifies, matter condenses, where attention bummers, possibility disperses. You sculpt existence with your gaze, moment by moment. This is not metaphor, it's participation. So when you say, "I'm trying to manifest," you're already behind. You don't need to try. You're always doing it. The question isn't whether you're creating only what you're creating unconsciously. Observation never stops. Every sigh, every worry, every private wish is an act of quantum measurement. To become conscious in this process is to reclaim authorship of your script. That's what becoming means, not evolving slowly, but remembering your role as the observer who chooses which version of the world to stabilize. And notice the field doesn't judge the frequencies you emit. It doesn't label them good or bad. It simply mirrors coherence, fear, joy, shame, love. They all produce patterns. The ones you repeat most often become the architecture of your daily life. This is the physics of becoming. You observe. The wave collapses. You feel. The form appears. You believe. The pattern stabilizes. Identity, therefore, is not fixed. It's a standing wave maintained by constant attention. Change your attention, and the wave shifts. But don't mistake this for control in the egoic sense. You're not dictating reality, you're dancing with it. The universe improvises around your coherence. When you relax into alignment, rather than command it, matter rearranges itself like a flock of birds responding to an unseen signal. You might notice that when you hold a clear inner state, gratitude, peace, certainty, the world seems to synchronize. Conversations align, coincidences multiply, and obstacles soften. That's the field translating your frequency into structure. If the double-slit experiment shows us anything, it's this: observation is creation's heartbeat. The observer and the observed are a single system exchanging information. You are not a visitor in this universe. You are its active participant, its living lens. From this recognition, a new question arises: not how do I create, but how coherent am I willing to become? Because the clearer the signal, the faster the wave collapses, the more stable your vibration, the more fluid reality becomes. And when you finally grasp that becoming is not a journey, but a state, you stop waiting for transformation to arrive. You realize it's already here, oscillating just beneath perception, waiting for your steady gaze to bring it into form. From physics, we descend into biology, because the quantum field doesn't stop at atoms, it breathes through neurons, through the charged circuitry of your very mind. The observer effect doesn't just collapse particles, it collapses patterns. And your brain is the stage where that miracle repeats itself each second. Imagine every belief as a strand of light in a living network. Each time you think a familiar thought, you fire that strand again. Every emotional reaction feeds it voltage. Over time, these pathways grow thick. Automatic, your personality hard-coded through repetition. You call it who I am, but it's closer to what I rehearse. Now, here's the magic. Neuroscience calls it synaptic pruning, the brain's quiet housekeeping. When you stop feeding certain circuits with attention and emotion, they weaken, dissolve, disappear. The same law that governs wave collapse governs your inner wiring. Energy flows where observation goes. Remove your focus, and the pattern disintegrates. That's neural death, yes, but also rebirth. Think of every old reaction: anger, unworthiness, fear as a signal loop replaying in your nervous system. Each time you interrupt that loop with presence, you send incoherence through the network. The old pattern trembles, loses power, fades, and in its place, new synapses begin to fire, fragile at first, like seedlings in fresh soil. You are literally reshaping the hardware of your consciousness, not metaphorically, biologically. The same voltage that once reinforced your limits becomes alchemy for your liberation. When you hold gratitude, when you breathe through discomfort instead of reacting, your body releases different chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, molecular confirmations of coherence. Dr. Joe Dispenza's research speaks of this, how sustained emotional alignment changes heart rhythm, brainwave frequency, even gene expression. Yet you don't need to memorize data to feel its truth. The proof is experiential. Remember the last time you forgave someone. Notice how your body softened, how time seemed to widen for a moment. That wasn't sentimentality, it was physics made flesh. Each emotion is a broadcast. Shame tells your cells to shrink. Joy instructs them to expand. When you hold a coherent state, when heart and mind oscillate together, your electromagnetic field strengthens. You become less noise, more signal. The universe hears you clearly. But here's the paradox that tests most seekers. Identity collapse feels like loss because your nervous system was wired for familiarity, not freedom. When the old self disintegrates, the body panics. It trembles as if dying, and in a way, it is. The neural scaffolding that once defined your reality is decommissioning itself. Don't rush this death, witness it. Every tremor is circuitry unbinding. Every tear is chemical transmutation. You are not falling apart, you are reconfiguring. The discomfort isn't a setback, it's a birth contraction. Here's a secret most avoid because it sounds too mystical to be scientific. Emotion is the interface between energy and matter. The brain may spark the signal, but the heart amplifies it. When those two centers synchronize, they open what researchers call a coherent frequency field. In that field, imagination stops being pretend, it becomes instruction. So, when you visualize not from lack, but from embodiment, when you feel as though it's already done, your neurons begin to fire in that pattern. Your body starts rehearsing a new identity. It doesn't distinguish vividly imagined experience from lived one. To the nervous system, rehearsal is reality. That's neuroplastic alchemy, matter following mind, biology obeying belief. The more consistently you inhabit that new emotional state, the stronger its circuits become. You'll notice subtle miracles: conversations shift, opportunities feel magnetized, resistance loosens. That's not coincidence, that's coherence echoing through your physiology. And when you reach the point where the new self feels natural, where peace no longer requires proof, you've crossed a threshold invisible to the senses but undeniable to the soul. You've proven that transformation isn't mystical, it's mechanical. It's the field adjusting to a new operator code. From this vantage, you begin to understand something profound. Every act of self-awareness rewires not just your brain, but the reality that reflects it. The particles outside respond to the patterns within. Your neural collapse mirrors quantum collapse. You are not just experiencing the universe, you are updating it. Now the old identity has begun to crumble. The scaffolding is down. You're standing in the open, between what has been and what is coming. It feels empty, silent, strange. But don't turn away, because that void you sense isn't absence. It's creation's waiting room. That silence you now feel, the one that hums beneath the skin after the storm of rewiring that's the void. Don't mistake it for nothingness. It's the quantum hallway between timelines. the vibrational corridor where one reality dissolves and another begins to take shape. To the ego, it feels like death. To the soul, it's homecoming. You may notice this space arrive after release. The project ends. The relationship fades. The pattern breaks, and suddenly the world goes still. You try to call the old life back, but its signal won't answer. You can't rush the new one either. It hasn't yet materialized. That's the gap most people fear. It's also the exact field where everything rearranges. The void is not punishment, it's calibration. The system has unplugged from one frequency but hasn't yet locked onto the next. Think of it as radio static between stations, not empty, just uncommitted. Every great transition lives here, from birth to awakening. The womb itself is a void, dark and dense with potential. Yet the human mind resists this in-between. It equates stillness with danger. Your nervous system wants momentum even toward what hurts, because movement feels safe. But evolution requires pause. Creation needs vacuum. Without the space between notes, music would be noise. Without the rest between breaths, life would be exhaustion. So when you find yourself suspended, unsure who you are or where this is heading, don't panic. Don't fill it with distractions, explanations, or forced affirmations. The void doesn't need you to fix it. It needs you to hold it, to witness its depth without naming it. In doing so, you teach your system a new kind of safety, the safety of not knowing. This is where coherence matures. You are learning to remain stable even when the field is not yet visible. The mind will say, nothing's happening. The truth is everything's happening beneath the threshold of perception. The quantum field rearranges silently, like stars shifting positions while you sleep. You've entered what mystics call the sacred pause. It's not a delay, but a gestation. Here, time bends differently. A day can feel eternal, and a week can birth lifetimes. Your job is not to accelerate it, but to inhabit it. Breathe into the emptiness until it reveals its texture. You'll begin to sense faint threads, ideas, symbols, nudges emerging from the dark. That's the new timeline whispering hello. But the void also tests allegiance. If you reach back for your old identity to prove something, to soothe insecurity, you reactivate its frequency. The jump reverses. So this is the moment to practice still trust, not passive waiting, but embodied surrender. Feel your body anchor into gravity, your breath becoming the bridge between worlds. Every inhale draws energy from potential. Every exhale releases attachment to form. You may feel loneliness here. That's natural. The old companion's habits, beliefs, even relationships vibrate on frequencies you've outgrown. Some will fade. Let them. Their absence is what creates the space for resonance to return. Loneliness isn't emptiness, it's expansion misunderstood. Eventually, presence itself becomes the new anchor. You start to realize that what you call the void is not a place between timelines. It's the raw field before you name any. It's the canvas of consciousness, unpainted, unlimited. And in that realization, fear transforms into awe. Stay long enough in the void, and something extraordinary happens. The body stops reaching. The mind stops rehearsing. Awareness settles, wide and luminous. You feel the pulse beneath stillness, the hum of creation waiting for your next coherent thought to give it shape. That's when the jump finalizes, not through effort, but through allowing. Because the void isn't a pause between stories. It's the point of origin for all of them. The universe breathes out through you, waits in silence, and breathes you back in as something entirely new. Soon, from this silence, a rhythm will return, not the noise of striving, but the steady beat of coherence reawakening. And that rhythm will guide you toward practice, not theory, not philosophy but lived navigation, where you learn to stabilize your frequency with conscious precision. That is the next threshold, turning awareness into method, and method into mastery. Out of the void's silence, rhythm begins to return, gentle at first, like a heartbeat finding tempo after stillness. The field starts to hum again, inviting participation. You've crossed through the collapse. Now coherence becomes your compass. The question is no longer why reality shifts, but how to stabilize once it does. Coherence isn't a mood. It's a signal, precise, measurable, unmistakable. It happens when your thoughts, emotions, and physical body broadcast the same frequency. When mind and heart stop arguing, the field hears you clearly. The result feels like ease, but it's actually precision. There are many doorways to this state, yet 3 stand out as ancient and immediate: coherent visualization, identity scripting, and heart-brain synchronization. Not rituals, but instruments. Not superstition, but circuitry. Let's start with visualization, the misunderstood art of seeing from, not toward. Most imagine the future as something distant, a movie projected on the wall of desire. But in coherent visualization, you dissolve the distance. You feel the emotion as though it were now. The body becomes the antenna, not the audience. Close your eyes and breathe to the pace until your breath and heartbeat synchronize, a quiet metronome in your chest. Now imagine not what you want, but what you already are in that alternate frequency. Feel how that version of you stands, breathes, speaks. Notice the texture of the air, the colors around them, the ease in their movements. Don't look at the scene, be the scene. The key isn't intensity, it's familiarity. Your brain cannot sustain what it perceives as fantasy, but it can reinforce what it recognizes. The more often you visit that state with emotional realism, the faster your neural circuits imprint it as baseline. Coherence means training your nervous system to treat the miraculous as mundane. The second practice, identity scripting, takes the unseen and translates it into language. But here, you don't write as someone who hopes. You write as someone who remembers. Begin with I am. Describe your life in present tense, not as if convincing the universe, but as if reporting facts from another timeline. Let your words carry sensory data: smell, sound, touch. Let emotion stain every line. The act of scripting tells the field, I know where I belong. Done correctly, this doesn't inflate ego, it stabilizes frequency. You're not pretending, you're programming. Every written sentence acts as a neural rehearsal. You're teaching your biology the story of its next identity until it forgets the difference between imagination and embodiment. The third practice is the bridge between the other two: heart-brain coherence. Place one hand on your chest, one on your abdomen. Inhale for 5 counts, exhale for 5. As rhythm steadies, feel gratitude rise, not for any reason, but as a chosen vibration. Gratitude is coherence's catalyst. It aligns neurons like soldiers falling into formation. When gratitude saturates your system, brain waves shift into alpha and theta, ranges, the state where imagination mingles with physiology. You become the signal, not the sender. Every coherent breath instructs your DNA. Every beat of your heart broadcasts stability into the field. These 3 practices are not separate acts, but movements in one symphony. Visualization sets direction. Scripting anchors identity. Coherence harmonizes signal. Done together, they create resonance strong enough to override residual patterns from the old self. But here's the deeper secret: it's not the exercise that matters. It's the state you carry after the exercise. 5 minutes of coherence followed by hours of doubt will cancel the wave. The universe mirrors your predominant frequency, not your occasional brilliance. So make coherence your default. Practice in the mundane moments: washing dishes, driving, walking, anchor the signal in daily rhythm until it becomes muscle memory. The more ordinary coherence feels, the more extraordinary reality becomes. Notice the shift when this happens. Life stops feeling like a waiting room. Events rearrange quietly, like furniture sliding into alignment. People begin to mirror your steadiness. Synchronicities multiply without effort. You've stopped broadcasting contradiction. This is the science of subtlety creation through consistency rather than force. Coherence is not glamour, it's calibration. And once calibrated, your reality begins to hum in tune. But coherence, while powerful, is fragile. One emotion, doubt, fear, impatience can scatter the signal. The next initiation, therefore, isn't about doing better practice. It's about mastering steadiness when evidence hasn't yet appeared. Because the moment you demand proof, you collapse the wave you just stabilized. And that brings us to the next frontier, the trap of evidence and the vibrational faith that makes the impossible inevitable. You can feel the field vibrating stronger now, coherent, pulsing, alive, yet the mind still asks, where's the proof? That question, innocent as it seems, is the needle that punctures the signal. Evidence hunting is the ego's favorite addiction. It whispers, show me it's real, and I'll believe. But the field operates by inverse law, believe, and it becomes real. When you demand confirmation before surrender, you reverse the current. You return to the old frequency of doubt, the broadcast that says, I am still waiting. And the field, ever precise, mirrors waiting with more waiting. This is how the loop sustains itself: desire, hope, doubt, delay repeated until awareness interrupts. Trust, then, is not weakness, it's quantum precision. It's the willingness to hold signal without external validation. You've learned coherence in practice now. Trust is coherence under pressure. Faith isn't blind, it's vibrational steadiness when the senses lag behind. Consider this when you plant a seed. You don't dig it up daily to check if it's sprouting. You water the soil. You watch for alignment, light, warmth, rhythm, knowing growth is inevitable because the structure for it exists. Yet most people uproot their manifestations every morning with worry, inspecting the field for proof, strangling the timeline mid-birth. Evidence is seductive because it feels safe. The body craves certainty, but certainty built on sight is just nostalgia, the comfort of what's already collapsed. True creation begins beyond sensory reach. The unseen is not absence, it's latency. The future already exists, but your signal must stabilize long enough for reality's pixels to resolve. In physics, this is coherence decay. A quantum system remains superposed in multiple states until disturbed. Observation collapses it. Doubt is disturbance. Every time you question whether it's working, you measure the wave too soon. The superposition collapses back to nothing happening. So what if you stopped needing to see it and started feeling it as done? That's not delusion, it's alignment. Gratitude for the invisible is the highest frequency of faith. It says to the field, I remember, and the field replies, then it is so. Trust isn't passive waiting, it's active stability. It's the steady hum beneath chaos, the calm frequency that refuses to detune even when noise rises. When life appears contradictory, money dips, relationships stretch, emotions flare, trust says, the field is recalibrating, not rejecting, because everything rearranging outside you is just matter adjusting to your new broadcast. People leaving frequencies mismatched, delays appearing, data re-indexing. The external world doesn't test you, it tunes to you. What you call setbacks are synchronization delays, the universe buffering between realities. The ones who master this stage glow differently. They stop chasing signs because they are the sign. Their presence radiates the calm of inevitability. They know manifestation is less about pulling outcomes in and more about ceasing to oscillate out. Trust is the still point that keeps the wave collapsed in your favor. It's the discipline of remaining in coherence long enough for matter to catch up. You'll know you've stabilized when silence feels full, when absence feels fertile, when the lack of evidence feels like confirmation itself. In that state, your nervous system learns a new response to uncertainty, not panic, but power. You feel expansion where fear used to live. You sense movement behind stillness. You recognize that the field's delay is not resistance, it's orchestration. The greatest creators throughout history carried this vibration. They built cathedrals without blueprints, discovered stars before telescopes, composed symphonies before instruments existed. They didn't wait for proof, they became it. And so can you. Because here's the quiet secret of the field: it only mirrors what you hold after doubt should have broken you. That's when your frequency graduates from rehearsal to reality. That's when the jump stabilizes and your new timeline becomes inevitable. And from that steadiness, a new invitation rises, not just to maintain your coherence, but to live it as navigation, to turn this frequency into a way of moving, choosing, speaking, breathing. Because the field doesn't respond to moments of faith, it responds to lifestyles of resonance. That's where we go next, into continuous navigation, where trust evolves into artistry, and your entire existence becomes the compass of creation. From trust comes motion, again subtle, deliberate, alive. You're no longer waiting for reality to align. You're steering through it like a lucid dreamer, aware mid-dream. This is where quantum jumping stops being an event and becomes a practice, a way of living tuned to coherence moment by moment. Reality is no longer something that happens to you. It's feedback, instantaneous, precise, mercifully honest. Every mood, every conversation, every micro-choice returns an echo of your current vibration. Navigation means learning to listen to that echo and adjust your internal frequency instead of blaming the external mirror. Think of yourself as a radio transmitter walking through infinite stations. Each thought is a dial movement, each emotion, a frequency adjustment. When you meet resistance arguments, delays, confusion, it isn't punishment, it's static. Static tells you you're between stations. Don't force it. Fine-tune. A breath, a pause, a realignment. And suddenly the music clears again. This is quantum navigation, not linear progress, but harmonic correction. It's the art of noticing when your signal drifts and gently returning to coherence. You begin to realize mastery isn't about never losing balance. It's about recovering alignment faster each time. You practice this everywhere: in traffic, in conversation, in solitude. When frustration arises, you breathe it into coherence rather than collapsing into reaction. When opportunity appears, you act from the frequency of readiness, not fear of loss. Life becomes participatory physics, you adjusting waveform with awareness. Soon, patterns emerge. You notice that coherence has its own gravity. The more consistently you hold it, the more effortlessly events organize around you. Synchronicities multiply, but now you recognize them not as miracles, but as metrics, indicators that you're tuned accurately. And yet, navigation requires humility, because the moment you try to control the field, coherence fractures. Control is a residue of fear disguised as focus. True alignment is responsive, not rigid. You steer reality like a surfer rides a wave, balance through surrender, direction through listening. When you live this way, language itself changes. I hope becomes I align. I want becomes I am choosing. You stop forecasting outcomes and start describing frequencies. The conversation with the universe becomes fluent, reciprocal. Even the body joins the dialogue. you begin to read sensations as coordinates. Tightness in the chest, signal drift, ease in the breath. Alignment confirmed, your intuition becomes data fast, precise, embodied. Navigation also means discernment. Not every path that glitters is coherent. Some opportunities belong to older versions of you. They shimmer because they remember your former frequency. The test is energetic. Does this feel like expansion or repetition? If the latter, bless it and move on. Coherence never clings. It flows. With practice, you'll sense when timelines open the subtle pull of excitement without anxiety. The calm surge before evidence. That's your invitation to act. Quantum navigation isn't passive. It's embodied responsiveness. When the door appears, you walk through without hesitation, trusting the field to reconfigure mid-stride. In this rhythm, you stop oscillating between extremes, elation and doubt, effort and surrender. You find the middle current where creation feels like breathing. Every exhale broadcasts intention. Every inhale receives confirmation. You become both transmitter and receiver, wave and observer. From this steadiness, life stops being unpredictable and starts being interactive. You begin to play with feedback deliberately. You speak coherence into rooms and watch tension dissolve. You hold calm in conflict and see circumstances rearrange. You realize that your presence, not your words, is the real communication. Continuous navigation transforms destiny from a straight road into a sea of probabilities, each wave responding to your tone. You're not racing toward a finish line. You're composing motion itself, improvising with the cosmos in real time. And when you hold this frequency long enough, something wondrous happens. Navigation turns into leadership. Others feel your signal and begin to tune themselves accordingly. Without teaching, you transmit. Without effort, you ripple. Because coherence is contagious, and in a world built on noise, one clear signal can recalibrate thousands. That's where this path inevitably leads, from individual mastery to collective resonance, from personal alignment to planetary activation. You've stabilized your own frequency long enough to feel it spreading outward. The field no longer stops at your skin. It radiates. Every thought, every calm breath sends signals into the shared web of awareness that binds us all. You begin to realize there is no isolated jump. Every timeline shift within you trembles the lattice of the collective. At first, the effect is subtle, a softening in the people around you, unexpected ease in conversations, synchronicities overlapping between friends. Then the pattern becomes unmistakable. The coherence you've cultivated begins to reorganize not just your story, but the stories that orbit yours. Science hints at this through what some call quantum entanglement particles, separated by distance still responding to each other instantaneously. As if distance were a suggestion, not a law, consciousness behaves the same. When one node in the network stabilizes in higher frequency, the information propagates. That's why peace can be felt across rooms, why presence can calm chaos without a word. You've seen this happen in small ways. A stranger smiles and your nervous system relaxes. Someone breathes deeply and everyone in the space exhales. These are micro-synchronizations, coherence traveling through resonance. The same physics that governs the dance of electrons governs empathy, leadership, love. So when you practice coherence, you're not just shifting your personal reality, you're transmitting possibility. You become a tuning fork in the human symphony. Others may not understand why they feel lighter around you, but their bodies recognize the code: safety, clarity, permission. This is how collective awakening begins, not through debate or ideology, but through frequency contagion. One stable field invites another to harmonize. Communities reorganize. Systems evolve. It's slow to the eye, but instantaneous in the field. And yet, the temptation remains to preach the discovery, to shout the formula. Resist that. Transmission is stronger than instruction. Words can argue, coherence cannot. You don't convince the field, you embody it. The way you walk into a room is the broadcast. The way you listen, forgive, choose silence, these are quantum acts. As more individuals hold coherence, interference patterns cancel out. The world's noise begins to self-correct. It won't look like revolution at first. It will look like kindness, small and quiet. But beneath those gestures, the field rewrites its equations. Remember, every jump you anchor releases data into the shared grid. Each time you collapse fear into trust, the collective code updates. The frequencies of lack and survival grow weaker, replaced by the signatures of expansion and interconnection. This is what the mystics called light work, what scientists might one day call coherent propagation. You may wonder, can a handful of steady signals truly shift the entire network? Consider the body, billions of cells obeying the rhythm of a single heartbeat. You are that heartbeat. We all are. The universe doesn't count numbers, it counts resonance. One coherent pulse outweighs 1,000 scattered frequencies. So your practice continues, not as duty, but as gift. Every morning you align, every night you release. You walk the world as a living stabilizer, collapsing timelines of fear and opening portals of possibility simply by existing authentically. Eventually you stop thinking in terms of me and them. The field makes no such distinction. You breathe for the whole. Your personal healing becomes collective healing. Your inner peace becomes environmental harmony. You realize that the ultimate quantum jump isn't vertical, it's communal. And in that realization, humility returns. Because coherence isn't ownership, it's service. The more light you hold, the softer you become. You see suffering and no longer judge it as regression. You recognize it as signal noise waiting for realignment. You offer presence instead of correction, love instead of doctrine. This is the closing of the loop, self to source, source to self, wave to particle and back again. You've discovered that the jump was never about escape, it was about remembrance. You remember that reality is relational, that consciousness is collective, that every observer is both creator and creation. And as this awareness settles, a gentle truth arises: the work is never finished. Because the field is infinite, but neither are you. Every breath becomes a ripple through eternity. Each act of coherence a blessing on the grid. The jump continues not as a leap, but as a living rhythm. From the collective hum, everything softens. The signal that once surged through your awareness now expands into silence, not emptiness, but spaciousness. The jump is complete, yet the dance continues. You've learned that the universe never stops recalibrating. It only pauses long enough for you to notice that you are it. Take a breath here. Feel how the field responds, subtle, reciprocal. You inhale, it contracts. You exhale, it unfolds. This is creation's heartbeat, and you are synchronized with it. There's no separation left to bridge, only remembrance to sustain. Look back for a moment. Every stage, the residue, the illusion of time, the physics, the void was never random. Each was a layer of awakening, a lens through which coherence refined itself. You didn't ascend away from your humanity, you descended into it, finally occupying the body as the bridge between worlds. You no longer chase signs because you are one. You no longer question if the field hears you because you are the field listening to itself. This isn't arrogance, it's integration. The observer and the observed have merged into a single awareness, expressing through countless forms. So what happens now? Nothing dramatic. You go on living, cooking breakfast, answering messages, walking through doorways. Only now, each ordinary act hums with reverence. You feel time folding quietly around your choices. You sense energy adjusting to your breath. You speak less, but every word carries voltage. Trust has matured into knowing. The questions that once haunted you, when will it happen? Who am I becoming? How does this work dissolve into one steady answer: I already am? And that knowing doesn't end the search, it redeems it. Every future version of you is simply a deeper remembering of the same truth. You've discovered that coherence isn't a goal, but a rhythm, something to be tended, like fire. Some days it blazes, some days it dims, but the flame remains, waiting for breath, waiting for awareness. That's your real practice now, tending the frequency with gentleness instead of demand. As you continue, you'll notice others resonating with this calm. They'll recognize something familiar in your presence, not your words, but your wavelength. You'll see them soften, awaken. Remember, that's the quiet power of living as coherence. No sermon, no spectacle, just frequency reminding frequency. And so, before we close, breathe once more into that awareness. Let gratitude rise, not as performance, but as recognition. Feel how much of you has already shifted simply by listening differently, by allowing these ideas to rearrange your inner architecture. You didn't come here to learn how to jump. You came to remember that you've been jumping all along. Now the field hums in agreement. The silence becomes music again. You are the note, the song, the listener. And as you move forward into the ordinary, the extraordinary will follow quietly, matching your coherence step for step. Because the jump was never a single moment. It was you always awakening to the truth that the quantum field has never been elsewhere. It has always been here, breathing with you, becoming through you, waiting only for your steady awareness to say, I am home.